I better record it. Okay, thank you. I get the thumbs up from Devora. Hi, everybody. We now have a minion, and Batya has joined us from the great state of Fort Collins, Colorado. We're now the home of Bina Block. And so I hope that they get to see each other often because it always makes me kvel when Moshniks get together. Alrighty, this is a two-part offering that I am calling bum ba bum 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 the legacy of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Tzaddik Zichronot Livracha, or how we got here. And I'm talking about Moshe. And when I'm talking about Moshe, I'm also talking about my relationship with Reb Zalman of blessed memory. So, my sweet friends, tonight won't be just any night. When thinking about putting something together, there was many choices I could have made. But when Shulamit wrote to me, when you wrote to me, Shulamit, about sharing basically a conversation that you once had with Reb Zalman, and it was about meditation, I went, aha. So that's where I'm going to lead into and leave us tonight, giving a sneak preview. When Reb Zalman mentions meditation as one of the core spiritual tools in the Jewish Renewal tool chest. And that'll lead us to next week, where we'll have an opportunity to hear a bissel of a conversation between Shulamit and Reb Zalman. So this evening, this is not a beginning Judaism class, right? And I'm going to, in some ways, challenge you, meaning I'm not going to assume you have the necessary education to understand everything that's going to be talked about tonight, because you're going to be hearing Reb Zalman himself talking, and you're going to also be hearing Rabbi Or Rose talking in a wonderful teaching that he gave some time ago about Reb Zalman. And so I'm going to do my best to catch us up with certain vocabulary and certain concepts, but I'm going to count on you. If you're left in, in the dust a little bit, please interrupt me. Raise your hand, say, can you please say more about so-and-so, because I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'll do my, or maybe you have a little inkling of what I'm talking about, and I'll do my best to fill in those blanks. However, I'm not going to go into depth, for instance, on the four worlds, even though that's mentioned tonight. If you want a teaching on the four worlds, let's do a teaching on the four worlds, okay? And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say four worlds, that too is something that you need to say, I don't know what you're talking about. So we have a wide variety of knowledge sets here tonight. People who've hung around the Jewish world for a long time, you have very strong Jewish backgrounds, to those of you who are fairly newer to the journey. Alrighty. So let's begin with a very basic understanding of what a abbreviation means that I just shared with you. So first of all, you should know that Reb Zalman of blessed memory, his name was Reb Zalman Schachter, not Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And I'm not going to get into all of that, except for the fact that at some point, you know what a shochet is? A shochet is a ritual slaughterer. I saw you waiting because I knew, Ellen, you didn't know it. But I also, there's lots of stuff that we all could use a good refresher. A shochet is a ritual slaughterer, and at some point Reb Zalman felt that was too violent a name, and he was going to have to add something to that in order to soften that. And so what did he add? Shalomi. My peace, my peacefulness. So you see, Shalom, Zalman Schachter became Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Now, the abbreviation following his name, you hear me often say, Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be for a blessing, that's in the plural, or Zichrona Livracha, may his name or her name be for a blessing, welcome Mary Rita. That would be with Z, chup chup L, right? Zichronot Livracha. But with some people, to show even greater respect, the T stands for tzaddik. Now, am I going out on a limb calling Reb Zalman a tzaddik? You know, for me, he was a tzaddik. And all of his students, he was a tzaddik. Now, the word tzaddik is a loaded word, and it carries with us a lot of other kinds of meaning, which I'm not going to go into right now, but it's an additional honorarium to say tzaddik zichronot livracha. Okay, so let's stop there just for a moment to see if there is any of you who have any questions yet about anything that I have covered so far. Okay, not enough to go on. Ah, Dan. Hey, Dan, what you got?
Well, does the name Zalman mean anything?
I don't know. That's a good question. You know, I bet you can do a quick Google and find out.
I will do just that.
All right, great. Report back to us. All righty, so let's move on with, there's some photos that you're going to see in a moment, which is part of Rabbi Or Rose's presentation, some of the many faces of Reb Zalman, including his gravestone. Now, on his gravestone, and I need to spotlight it for myself, up on the upper right, it says, Reb Zalman Shakta Shalomi, he loved us to God, which gives you, he's buried in a cemetery in Boulder where he lived for many, many years. Prior to that, Reb Zalman was in Germantown in Philadelphia, which is where I met him, but he didn't meet me. Now, when I say at the beginning, I'm going to be talking about Reb Zalman and how we got here, I'm talking about us Moshniks, and how we got here, where we situate ourselves in the tree, of which Reb Zalman is also a part. We are part of his legacy, right? Just very quickly, just to give you a little bit of my background with Reb Zalman, I met him in around 1988, 89. Like I say, I really didn't meet him. I did go to a service that he was leading at B'nai Or in Germantown. It was referred to as B'nai Or, the fellowship or the brothers. Like B'nai means children, but it also means brothers, which later became Pnei Or, when Reb Zalman went through an awakening himself to the brothers of light, to the faces of light, because a very important part of Jewish renewal is not just recognizing but embracing the egalitarian nature of women's places in Jewish life. Okay. So I went to a service that Reb Zalman was leading, and I don't remember very much about it, except for that it was in the same church that Pnei Or, Reb Marsha Prager's community, now meets in. And I walked up a flight of stairs, and there maybe were a dozen people there. And right about, probably after an hour or so, I left. Because my conservative Jewish background had no way to connect with anything that was going on there. People were sitting on the floor. Well, that itself raised my eyebrows after sitting, and sitting on the floor in a circle. There was also a woman there who had no hair. Now, I know who that is now. Shulamit's laughing. It's Phyllis Berman Ocean, of course. Which, and Phyllis is the late Arthur Waskow's of blessed memory wife. And Arthur was there as well. It was really weird. What can I tell you? And I left and I went back. A woman I was dating at the time, she had encouraged me to go because she thought I might like it. And well, jump many, many years later, probably at least 15 years later, where I have found out about DLTI, the Daven and Leadership Training Institute, of which, of course, Rabbi Moshe Prager is the founder of and one of the leaders of. And I found out about that through Dee Herman, who I met at a at a great experience that we had at a local hospital. And she had just returned from the fourth week at DLTI, right? So you can imagine how exhausted she was. And she came to what was a 3-night and 4-day intensive in cancer counseling at a local hospital. It was so exhausting, just those few days. And she came after that fourth week. Well, anyway, I barely knew Dee. We ran in different circles together, but she told me about this DLTI thing, and it sounded interesting. But I said to myself, Jewish Renewal, that's really weird. I'm not going to jump into anything without checking it out first. And so what I did was I drove up to Philadelphia to see or to be part of a service that Reb Marsha and Chazan Jack of blessed memory were leading. And that's where my life was changed. And without going into what I experienced that morning, the more important part of the story is that Reb Marsha had to be in D.C. the following day. And so I drove her to D.C. She was doing some work with Rabbi David Schneier, another important person in my life. And we had that whole car ride from Philly to D.C. to talk. And I told her the story that I just told you about my first meeting with Reb Zalman and how weird it was. And she said, oh, yeah, I perfectly get it. At that time, they were experimenting with everything to see what would stick to the wall. And they were trying and experimenting with many, many different kinds of forms to see what would bring them to the greatest psychospiritual heights as possible as a quote-unquote neo-Hasidic tradition, which Jewish Renewal is, in the legacy of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, so we go all the way back to 1700 and those days. If you looked at a tree of which we are grafted onto, that's where it goes back to. Alrighty, so again, we're looking at some of the photos of Reb Zalman in exhilaration with his, on the top left, rainbow talit. Now, you may not be aware that Reb Zalman was the very first to wear and to encourage others and to design the rainbow talit. Up until that, which was like the early 60s at Camp Ramah, I think he was working, he had the kids make them. And so that was the beginning of all that. And before then, and for those of you who who went to shul in those days, the only color talit men wore were black and white, right? And there was no color talitot, and women did not wear talitot. All right, you have the oldest picture of him, or maybe the youngest picture on the bottom left, and of course in the middle on the bottom is him in a tete-a-tete with the Dalai Lama. And that story you can read about in The Jew and the Lotus, which is a wonderful, wonderful book that is really required reading if you want to know about how Jewish Renewal kind of infused itself into and how other spiritual traditions have influenced Jewish Renewal already, and some other photos. So without further ado, I want to share with you a teaching from Rabbi Or Rose. It's on. It was done by the Bronfman Institute. It's going to be about 9 minutes long, and some questions. I would encourage you, if a question arises, to write it down. Write down a word or two, just to so you remember. I don't think I'm going to do it during this video, but in the subsequent video of Reb Zalman, I think what I'm going to do is occasionally stop the video for a moment in order for us for me to raise some questions and just explain a few things that I don't want to get away without further elucidating on. Okay, so let's go back to here. And again, make a note or two if there's something that interests you and inspires you.
Reb Zalman was born in Poland and then lived in Austria. And then he and his family attempted to outrun the Nazis, tragically. In their case, thank God, they were successful. And through travel by boat in those days, through several different countries, he and his family made their way to the United States, to New York. It's interesting that he was raised in what we might describe, I think, as a modern Orthodox family. His father and mother were both the children of Belzer Hasidim, but they saw themselves as being more modern, and they made a point of educating Reb Zalman and his siblings both in religious and secular contexts. And Reb Zalman said later in life that he found his early educational experience somewhat dizzying. However, he also understood that it contributed to the eclectic and creative person that he would become decades later. So he arrived in the United States, and he had already had exposure to Chabad, including meeting by chance the person that would become the seventh Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But he encountered Chabad, interestingly, while in Antwerp, which was one of the family's stops along the way to freedom. And there, it wasn't in a yeshiva or a youth group, but he joined a group of diamond cutters and polishers. And it was a unique group, and he describes the scene in the workshop where the leader of the group had a handheld microphone and a small speaker, and as they were going about their work, the leader would read to them various sacred texts, including from the corpus of Chabad Lubavitch, the masterwork, the Tanya, but also, interestingly, from modern Western philosophical and literary works. And that was Reb Zalman's first encounter with Chabad, and he was very moved by the sincerity, by the openness, by the spiritual intensity of this small group of diamond cutters and polishers. And it actually became a model for him for the community building that he did in his mature years with Jewish Renewal, etc. So he arrives in the United States in 1940, and the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, that is the father-in-law of the seventh Rebbe, was very kind to him and to his family. Not only did he help Zalman and his siblings find places in local schools, but he also helped his family find an apartment, and he gave them some money to set up a small furrier business in their apartment. And so Reb Zalman felt like he owed a great deal to the sixth Rebbe and felt very attached to him. In fact, I want to share with you a slide in which Reb Zalman speaks about his relationship with Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef Schneerson of Lubavitch, who died in 1950. Here is Reb Zalman in his 70s in an interview that I conducted with him for Shema magazine, reflecting on the Rebbe craft, as he called it, including his first teachers. To this day, I still feel that Reb Yosef Yitzchak was more my Rebbe than anyone else. When he spoke or davened, I felt a sense of attunement with him. When I was with him, I felt all the fibers in my being drawn to him. It was not just what he said, but his facial expressions and body language. When Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak told a story, he would tell it with such rich detail, even though he had a speech impediment. But he did not want to deny us any part of the description because he wanted to take us into an imaginative space. And when he davened, he opened my heart. I sensed he was talking directly to God and inviting us to join him in the sacred landscape. The same was true at the Rebbe's Tish. While it wasn't a beautifully ritualized experience like that of Baba of Hasidim, there was a palpable sense that Zeh HaShulchan Asher Lifnei Hashem, this table is set before God. And at the Pesach Seder, there's an understanding that when you raise the first piece of matzah to your mouth, your kavana, your intention was not simply to feed your body, but to feed your emunah, your faith as well.
So as Devorah put into the chat, Rabbi Or Rose is a devotee of Reb Zalman, studied personally with him, and has taught some Aleph classes. And I had the privilege to be in his class at Kala last summer. There's a number of things that he touches on that I think needs some additional highlighting, both in a historical way and a personal way for myself. So he talks about being in Antwerp. And I remember reading that wonderful story about working for the diamond industry, and there being texts that were taught out loud while those who were cutting and polishing the diamonds were working. Renee's family were diamond dealers who did just that in Antwerp. Now, Renee once asked or tried to find out where Reb Zalman worked, but it was not for the Brockfelds. Because there were many, this is what Jews did in Antwerp at the time. Another thing that they did was they sang nigunim, like we do. They sang, melodies without words, kind of like whistling while you work. What a wonderful way to keep your concentration while at the same time really deepening your kavanah, your intention on your work. Now, another connection to the Brockfeld family, because he mentions in the slide, Reb Zalman reflects on his Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef Schneerson, who died in 1950. Now, his son-in-law became then the next Chabad Rebbe. And it was his son-in-law that my father-in-law met in Marseille when they were both trying to find a way out to get to the United States. And what Reb Schneerson actually had conversation with my late father-in-law, Jonas Brockfeld, and told him what he was going to be doing when he gets to the United States. Now remember, Chabad was not Chabad as we know it. But he told my father-in-law that when he gets to the United States, his mission was to do exactly what we know Chabad as now. To do outreach. To do what we call keruv. And I'm going to unpack that word in a short moment. By the way, I'm going to take a snapshot of everybody who's here and send you the links to both of the videos that I was working with, because they're much longer. I'm just offering snippets. Reb Or's is over an hour, and I showed you a little less than 10 minutes. And Reb Zalman's also around an hour, and I'll be showing you a short portion. So if you want to go take a look at the rest of it, I'm going to send that out to you all. So that's the Antwerp's connection, and I use the word shaliach. The plural for shaliach is shlichim. So around the late 1950s, they were already in the United States, and the Rebbe, the Chabad Rebbe, Reb Schneerson, right? He sent Reb Zalman and Rabbi Shlomo Karbach of blessed memory as a tag team to go and do keruv, outreach to college students, right? And what they found, of course, was disaffected young people who had no entry points to any kind of spiritual life in Judaism. And especially as we get into the early 60s and later, Reb Zalman talks a lot about how when he goes to an ashram, or he goes here and he goes there, how it's mostly Jews who are there because they find out the spirituality they were looking for elsewhere. And so it really was Reb Zalman and Reb Shlomo's, it was their mission to get to that. And of course, Shlomo started the House of Love and Prayer in Berkeley, And Reb Zalman, we're here. So this is what he put into motion. Talks a little bit about, or does Reb or Rose, in that quote about the imagination. And Reb Zalman would use the word enchantment, and you've heard me use that word, right? That when we bring our kishkas, and our combination of our, our spiritual life and our intellect, in order to create pictures in our mind, we bring something to a story, and sometimes, if we're so lucky, to our daven and to our prayer life, that would not be there unless we bring them to it. So we're going to hang on to that idea. And then the last thing that he talks about, which really resonated for me, was when he listened to the Rebbe daven, to prayer. He felt like he was talking, had a relationship with God. Now, I didn't really experience that fully for myself. I got a taste of it at DLTI. But when I really experienced, when I was taking a class at Isabella Friedman, and on one Shabbat and one morning for Shachari, who else is there teaching a class and leading Shachrit is Rabbi Eben Leader. Now, for those of you who know Reb Eben, also he's a real chassid, and what I discovered by sitting at his feet, and being in the same room, was he was davening like he was talking to God. Remember, I mentioned before my conservative Jewish background. This was not something that I was ever exposed to. Even with DLTI, that was what's kind of like, it cultivated the ground. But I really had to meet a Rebbe, someone who was doing that in real time for me to experience. And of course, then later, a lot more of my Jewish Renewal teachers. So that brings us up to speed with what we just watched. And like I said, there's a lot more to that video if you want to take a look. Any comments or questions? He also mentions the Rebbe's Tish. Does everybody know what? Hi, Natasha, welcome. The Rabbi's Tish. So a Tish is a table. And it's traditional to go sit with the Rebbe on Shabbos afternoon, especially for Sudash Lishit, for the third meal. And there'd be story and song and a little prayer, maybe a lot of nigunim, songs without melodies, without words. And so he learned a lot sitting at the feet of the Rebbe at the Tish when the Rebbe, as he said, would tell stories, even though he had a stutter, did he say, or a lisp? I forget which one it was. Questions, comments, or anything that really raised your, or made a bell, like, oh, that's why we do that. Because the rest of the time together, we're hearing Reb Zalman talk and my comments on it, what I'm hoping is a lot of lights will go off for you. That, that's why we do that, or that's how we came to do that. Anybody? I'm going to throw this out there. Go ahead, Dan. You don't have to raise your hand. Just unmute yourself.
Well, I'm intrigued a little bit about the Chabad business with outreach, which I don't know about the time, but in general, we were always taught Jews don't proselytize or do outreach. Although I think that was more for non-Jews. I don't know whether there was any rule or minhag about not proselytizing, so to speak, to Jews, disaffected Jews. But it's interesting that Chabad did that and successfully. And what it reminded me of was Zalman's idea, if I understand correctly, not to create another movement, but to create rabbis and cantors that would go out to all the other different conservative, reform, reconstructionist, and everybody to sort of infiltrate renewal ideas out. So I don't know whether it's a proper connection, but it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, I think there's a direct connection to all of that. First of all, remember that the times we're talking about are post-Holocaust, right? And making their way to the United States to, they knew they had work to do in order to bring, to spread the gospel, in a word. Now, yes, a lot of that traditionally had to do with doing keruv, meaning bringing people closer. The non-Jews, people who were considering conversion, but what it became for Chabad as a movement, in order to, as you use the word infiltrate, I think Reb Zalman used the word a virus, right? Didn't want Jewish Renewal to turn into a denomination. By doing so, then there needed to be a very, his understanding and mine of the denominations is that there are firm boundaries around denominations, and he did not want to create that, but rather, as you point out, Dan, it to be. I'm not sure he was thinking about this when he was working with college students. This comes much later, right? How he's going to influence American Jewry in general, and how he's going to learn from other traditions. Remember, he's a child of the 60s, or actually he's older then, and with all the experimentation with drugs and with Eastern traditions, he learns a lot of important things about coming closer and being in relationship to divinity, even if there was no deity so involved in the other traditions. And we're going to get into a little bit, because he's going to talk about the movement from deity to theism. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Batya, did you have something that you wanted to say? I saw... But yes, Dan, there is a direct connection to all of this, and there's a through line.
Right.
Yeah. Batya, did you have something? No. Yes? No? You just unmuted yourself, though? No. Okay. Or as my 1.5-year-old granddaughter likes to say, no. Devorah.
Actually, I wanted to, Dan, you made a reference to, what was that word? About Chabad going out and gathering new people. And so my first experience of Chabad in my very Jewish world that I grew up in was the Chabad mobile that came to my high school with the tefillin on Friday afternoon. And so it was really wonderful for boys. There was lots for them to do, but I tried to get close, and it was like, stay away, stay away, stay away. You can't do that.
Yeah. So think of an egalitarian Chabad that takes Chabad beyond places that Chabad could ever go because of halacha, because of Jewish law, and their the way they follow it. And Natasha, I'm going to need you to change how you've got your phone, because I'm worried about you falling over. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the other thing I wanted to just mention, because you're going to move on from this, but Reb Zalman spent a lot of time in Canada, in Winnipeg, as a Hillel director, and that's where Or Rose grew up with him. And I also had a rabbi who was mentored by him as well, from Winnipeg.
Nice. Yeah.
So
great.
There is a Canadian connection. It's wonderful.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did Renewal and Reb Zalman try to infect or infiltrate Orthodox? Or how did that not work, rather than just go out to disaffected or reformist liberal types?
I can't answer that question in a way that maintains a respect for Reb Zalman, because there are some stories that are not very pleasant about the way that he was turned away by the Orthodox world, okay, who saw him in a much, much different light and felt that what he was doing was treif. Everybody know what I mean by treif? Not kosher, all right?
That makes
So,
sense.
uh,
Okay.
and I wouldn't describe that it was going out to a disaffected world, but rather to a world that was hungry, and that the Lubavitcher Rebbe recognized that there's a spiritual hunger among Jews that's not being addressed, and that they could, especially through story and song, and of course, once you get into Hasidic teachings, it's touching upon really, really deep psycho-spiritual stuff. Shulamit, and then I'm going to move on. If you can find your button.
And figure out how to unmute.
You
You're
did it.
unmuted now.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say it was just a word that I'm reflecting on, Dan, but I never felt like Reb Zalman tried to infiltrate anything. He was just Reb Zalman. He did what he did. If you liked it, great. And if you didn't, then I think he would tell you to go do something different. It's just my opinion. Thank you for
Yeah, that's why I backed away from the word infiltrate. He wasn't a spy in the house of love. He was more like an emissary in a house that didn't even yet know what love was all about.
I was not trying to put a negative spin on it.
I absolutely. We didn't take it that way, Dan. Alrighty. I used the word keruv. So keruv means to bring close or to draw near. If you think of in ancient times when the temple stood, we had karbanot, right? Those are the sacrifices that were brought to the temple. Hi, Gail, welcome. Alrighty, and so that comes from the same root of kuf resh vet karov, to bring close. And so in ancient times, we practiced bringing our animals and other kinds of sacrifices to the temple, because the temple, as Reb Marsha I've heard say, it was like a wormhole. I think that's a Star Trek thing, if I'm not mistaken. To divinity, right? It was a makom, a place where with direct access. But here touches on something that you were talking about, Dan, that to bring close, to draw near, sometimes refers to outreach, specifically efforts to welcome intermarried couples, unaffiliated Jews, and converts into the Jewish community. Okay, so it became a much wider umbrella for an understanding of what doing keruv means. Okay, so we already had the word keruv. Let's take a look at two other words. Halacha. Halacha, the collective body of Jewish religious laws derived from the written and oral Torah. Alrighty, that's what we know halacha or halacha is, but it comes and shares the same root as lalechet, to walk. So halacha really is like the Tao, the way that one walks in a Jewish way, given the structure and the tradition of our peoples, providing practical day-to-day guidance on how to live, dictating everything from dietary rules to ethical behavior. Now, one of the reasons why I point this out here is that the Jewish Renewal has no halakha. We have what I would call, and what has been called, permeable boundaries. We go in directions, and Reb Zalman certainly taught about how we can understand these, let's call them orthodox, but orthodoxy is probably a better word, right? Of the do's and the don'ts in the context of the world that we're living in now as enlightened, egalitarian, 21st century men and women, okay? So it took him, he had to go through a long journey himself in order to wake up and begin teaching these kinds of concepts. One example being the concept of eco-kashrut, right? Of asking the question, is it enough to ritually slaughter an animal in a kosher manner for it to be kosher, to be suitable, fit to eat? And his answer was, nah, hold on a second. Don't we need to take into consideration the way that the workers are treated? Don't we need to consideration how the animals are treated before that they are slaughtered? All right. So he opened up an entire question of things for us to have intentionality about. And if there's anything that Judaism is about, is living an intentional life. Let's look at one more word. I think there's a letter missing. Rabbono Shalom. Not ribbon Shalom. Although, it's Pride Month. Rabbono Shalom. It's a traditional and deeply personal way of addressing God, particularly used in personal supplications, blessings, and reflective prayers. Rabbono Shalom. It's kind of like, I don't know how many of you have a relationship like I do with Chava Bailey, but I call her Chavala, and she'll call me Markala. If I put a la at the end, it's like a diminutive that shows love. So Rabbono Shalom is kind of like that. It's like talking to your lover, talking to someone who's so close to you that they know you through and through, and they see you for who you are. So Reb Zalman is going to use this phrase, and I'm sure you've heard this phrase before, Rabbono Shalom, as well as many other names for God. So without further ado, let's move on. I think that's what's coming up next. Okay. So what's coming up next is the beginning of this video, where I kind of edited a bunch of places of Reb Zalman singing his musical setting for the V'taher Libenu of the Chabe Emet, which is, by the way, in our Shabbat morning Siddur, which we say silently. Maybe the next time you get there, you'll go, purify our hearts to serve you sincerely.
V'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, liyavdecha beyemet, v'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, le'ovdecha beyemet.
Oh, sorry, I need to go back. So before I start this part of the video, Reb Zalman is coming out of the nigun, of the melody, V'taher Libenu, purify our hearts so that we may serve you. And he's going to go now into a conversation, hitberdut, a conversation with God, right? And he didn't write this down. This is a beautiful, beautiful modeling for us of a prayer life that's in real time.
Purify our hearts so we serve you sincerely, in order that all our investment of energy should not go for nothing, and that we not succumb to be constantly upset and tumult. Show us, teach us the way, so that our lives will have meaning. My job with you is to tell you today a little bit about the core teachings of Jewish Renewal. And nothing will make sense if you don't understand the notions of paradigm shift. The notions of paradigm shift are essential, so let me spell that one out. When you open up the Chumash and you read about Avraham, the Avot, the
The Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, our Torah.
tribes, Exodus, the giving of the Torah at Sinai. The world view in which this was located is what's called a reality map. In that reality map, God creates the world in 6 days and rests on Shabbos. In that reality map, God comes down to Mount Sinai. In that reality map, God goes walking in the Garden of Eden. In that reality map, God says, let me go down and check out what they're doing at the Tower of Babel, or let's see whether the outcry that reaches me from Sodom and Gomorrah. And so you have a notion of a God who moves in space, as it were, but is very powerful. By the time we get to the destruction of the first temple, a great shift is happening, the whole world. In Greece you have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In the Holy Land you have Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel. You have Zarathustra in Iran, you have Buddha and Mahavira in India, you have Lao Tzu and Confucius in China. Can you imagine what all these beings saw? It was a time that there was another shift happening for them, and people call it the axial age, meaning that there was some turning going on at that time. And after that, Judaism returning from Babylon with a different script for Hebrew, with names for the months excuse me, that came from Babylonia. Then the story of Mordechai and Esther, Marduk, Ishtar, a whole new thing comes in. The men of the great gathering, and the way in which Mishnah gets created. And now we have another world view, which says that Hamakom, Hu Mekomo Shel Olam Vein HaOlam Mekomo. He is the place in which, God is the place in which the universe takes place. It is not that the universe is the place in which He is. That shift is a shift from deism to theism.
So I mentioned before about the shift from deism to theism. So what did Reb Zalman just do? He just took us through a shift in the way people were thinking, in what he calls the reality map, the way that we understand things. We might understand that too as part of that is our sacred myth and how we look at it in terms of the context of the times we're living in, and the consciousness has been raised by all those people who he pointed out that were not Jewish, but going through a great raising of consciousness, recognizing that there is a oneness to all reality, whether or not those spiritual traditions spoke of them as God, or in any other way, in any other manner, or the way, for instance. So let's take a moment here, because the last thing he says is that this shift goes from deism to theism. All right, so what is deism and what is theism? Does anybody like to just, what deism is? So it comes from the same, deity comes from the same word, right? That there is a God, and let's call that God a noun. Alrighty? That's the way I best understand this shift in consciousness, from God as a noun to God wouldn't have been expressed this way in those days, but rather God is a verb. Or, as he says, the world is a place of God. God is not the place where God is. He says it in Hebrew at the end. Have you heard what that is? And then uses the word makom. But I'm going to just be a little clearer about that in a moment. Let's take a look here at this reimagining traditional concepts of God that's very much a part of Jewish renewal thought. But it's also part of this emerging, what's the word I'm looking for? A transformation of the way that we not just understand, but experience divinity. So in deism to theism, we're going from a distant God to an intimate God. In other words, that God is the overseer of everything, but is above and beyond and not involved in the world from a moment-to-moment basis. So traditional deism views God as a supreme architect who created the universe. Now, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, but we're rather, maybe, if I'd be so bold, we're improving upon that for an understanding of God, and that's more relational and more felt, a felt experience. When people ask me, how do you understand, do you believe in God? I don't even know how to respond. I don't believe in God. I experience what we call God. Alrighty? And the G word is a loaded word. So this is from traditional deism to a more intimate, day-to-day, living in, swimming in godliness, let's say, is, here it says, a rejection of the clockmaker. Following post-Holocaust theology, renewal rejects the classic theistic notion of an omniscient interfering monarch in the sky who dictates every event. Instead, the divine is experienced as an active, unfolding presence. And let's take a moment just to go back to the sacred myth. How does God introduce God's self to Moshe at the bush? What is the name that God said when Moshe says, "I really want to know your name"? What does Hashem say? What does God say? What does divinity say? Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I saw it on your lips, Devorah. Right? And which has lost a lot in translation when it made its way into the Greek, and to many translations. It is not, as we call it, the Popeye translation, I am what I am. What it means is, I will be what I will be. All right? So, in a way, God is describing God's self as kind of like the gingerbread man. You can't catch me. Just as soon as, and which is what I think that idol worship is all about, as soon as you try to make a descriptive word about something and you name it and that's it, you've kind of like placed boundaries around it that does not allow it to thrive and live and be what it's going to be. Right? So Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh is the opposite of this interfering monarch in the sky who dictates every event, although we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because Hasidic thought also senses that divinity is active in every moment. And there's a beautiful saying that divinity calls out to every blade of grass that says grow, grow, right? So rather than the fixed noun, the divine is experienced as an active, unfolding presence. Let's go back to the third thing here. Embracing Hasidic joy. Again, remember, as we're unpacking here deism to theism, we're doing it within the context of Jewish renewal, right? Which is a direct descendant of Hasidut, of Hasidism, right? And I'm not talking about the men who are running around Borough Heights with the long beards and the long streimels and the coats in the middle of the summer. Embracing Hasidic joy, Ivdu et Hashem besimcha. right? So that has been described, especially by Reb Nachum and Abraza, that if there's anything you should know about how to live one's life, live it with joy. So the movement weaves the ecstatic, emotional, and mystical teaching of Hasidism into egalitarian modern life. God is found not just in theology, but through bodily prayer, chanting, meditation, and dance, which is a nice looking forward to next week when Shulamit will share with us her conversation about meditation with Reb Zalman. But look at these other ways through bodily prayer. Now we're not just talking about shuckling, that is an embodied prayer, but we're also talking about the many wonderful ways in which Jewish Renewal has invited us into an embodied prayer experience. We don't do that for the most part online here in the Zoomagon, but in many Jewish Renewal settings, you will have a more concentrated emphasis on physicalizing prayer. Bodily prayer, chanting. Well, you've certainly witnessed and been part of chanting experiences, meditation, and dance, of course. We like to get it on in Jewish Renewal. I don't know, in my upbringing, our tuchuses were stuck in our seats, right? And nobody ever moved. If you did, I don't know what would happen. All right, and then last but not least here, it's what I've touched on before, ecological spirituality. What? There's an ecological spirituality? Renewal redefines the concept of a divine connection through environmental stewardship. Treating the earth as alive and connecting makes God's presence highly personal and relational. So you'll notice as I was editing this, I didn't edit that last mention of God's name here in the bottom, because usually I'll edit the O out and put an exclamation point in there. I learned that somewhere in one of Reb Zalman's writings where he was using that, and I loved it, and I've used it ever since. But did you notice in the video, there was a moment when Reb Zalman referred to God as he?
No, I missed
Did
it.
you remember? See that moment? Chaya, you're nodding your head, yes. There was a moment, and he immediately changed it to God and speaking about God. So he was learning, he was growing, he was changing, he was evolving all along, right up until the very end, where he was still learning and teaching about how to age with intention, and especially in his book, The December Project, how each part and decades of our life can be seen as something different ways in which we grow our souls. Moshe, speaking of Moshe, there's Moshe, came to join us. Welcome.
Thank you, and great to be here. When we were first exposed to Reconstructionist Judaism, Kaplan's book was Theism Without a Deity.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that it sort of kept in the left brain, where Zalman took it into the right brain. I mean, is that proper understanding?
I don't know if it's proper, but I liked it.
It's
Cares
also
if proper.
in the back of Red Marsh's Siddur. She's got
Yeah.
this gorgeous diagram, which kind of lays it out a little like that, I think.
That's right. Yeah. So Mordechai Kaplan of blessed memory, he is on that, a part of that tree. But yes, I think that's a kind of a nice way to look at it, Moshe, in that Renewal brought a more, we can call it right brain, but we know that doesn't work that simply anymore, influence that it was. I'm not sure Reconstructionist, just as an aside, exists as Kaplan-esque anymore, anywhere. The shul that Dan belongs to, I mean, it's two rabbis who are very, very Renewal in their leanings. And Adat Shalom here in Bethesda, Maryland, Rabbi Rachel Hirsch Epstein, she got smicha from Jewish Renewal. And so,
Fred.
so in that way, it's exactly what you were talking about before, Dan, how Jewish Renewal served to make its way into all the different branches of American Jewry. Dan, you have your hand up, and then I want to share with you the last video that I edited out of the longer video. Go ahead, Dan.
Can you put up the deism theism screen again?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Because what interests me is number 3, embracing Hasidic joy. God is found not just in theology, but in prayer, chanting. The one thing that to me sounds like it's left out is in Tikkun Olam, in terms of behavior, acting. We are the hands, the fingers, the voices. We are co-creating godliness. And so I just wanted to add that in, that it's something that sometimes Renewal is not as active in as Reconstructionism or so, in terms of Tikkun Olam, social justice and social action. And I find that to be holy work, spiritual work, and sacred work too.
I completely agree. I think that you'll find in brick and mortar Jewish communities that it's very much a part of it. And it's certainly taught classes and whole sections of the Aleph rabbinical, Aleph ordination programs of the importance of that. I think right now Rabbi Deb Kolodny is teaching a whole course on that, and there's so many teachers who are doing that. So yeah, that's an important thing to bring up, Dan. Thank you. Alrighty, so I wanted to move on so the traditional way, remember in the old reality map, God comes down from Mount Sinai. In the new reality map, God was there all along. I think that's a pretty good example of what Reb Zalman's talking about, right? And what is that all about? Is Hamakom. That God is in this place, and I did not know. Yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh v'ani lo yadati. All the ways in which that line of Yaakov waking up from his dream of the ladder to heaven, and that's basically what he awakens to, the fact that divinity is infused throughout reality, throughout creation, and it's not, as Reb Zalman often referred to as, the pediatric understanding of God in the heavens with the white beard and the long hair. Alrighty. Aspects of divinity. So I might have to save this to next time, because we are closing in on the end, and I do want to, and this is longer than 10 minutes. How you all holding up? Thumbs up, another 10, 15 minutes? Is that okay? Okay. If you need to leave for any reason, I won't take it personally. Alrighty, aspects of divinity. Here we are, the 4 worlds, which of course we talk a lot about in Jewish Renewal. Why? Because it's very much a part of Hasidic and Kabbalistic thought. We have the world of Asiya, of the world of things, of the world that God created in that great sacred myth, right? The things that we can touch. We have the world of Yetzirah, the world of feelings, the world of formation, in which things kind of like they got funneled into the world. How? Because they took shape and form and idea, the world of Bria. And the world, the highest of the 4 worlds, is Atzilut. Now this is all backwards, which has the quote unquote lowest of the worlds on top. But you can see that it spells out each of these words are and these worlds are associated with one of the letters of the Tetragrammaton, Hey, Vav, Hey, Yud, with the Yud being, of course, Atzilut. The smallest of the letters is the largest of the ideas. I love this, which of course many of you are well acquainted with. When you turn this upside down, there you have us being created in the image of God. You can see whenever I showed my bat mitzvah students this, they went, "Wow, that's really cool!" They could see the stick figure of in the Yud Hey Vav Hey, and if you want to take that one step further, you can see it here with a smiling face, or you can see it here with a body superimposed. Also with the 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire superimposed onto the 4 worlds. And then finally, we have Yud He Vav He, Yah, Yah. That God's name itself is the breath of life. So the next time we sing on Shabbos morning, Nishmat kol chai tivarech et shimcha, which always comes right after Shulamit giving a meditation, right? Before I do my drash usually. What does that say? Nishmat kol chai, the breath of all life, praises your name. Why? Because the breath of all life is God's name. Whenever we breathe, we are, quote unquote, praising God. So let's get finally to Reb Zalman talking about all of these worlds. All right. Make a note if there's anything in here that you need spelled out a little bit, fleshed out a little bit more for you, and we'll start next session with that.
And so each generation has to bring up the teaching, the Torah from the past, and make it compatible to the reality maps that they have in the present.
Okay, I'm going to stop that just a second. Dan, you recognize Mordechai Kaplan and what he just said? Yeah, backwards compatible. So they're not, there's many intersections.
So when we talk about God as creator, this God who is the creator, I can't change him. He has done it. The world is as it is. I can't impress on God. I can't plead with God. I can't cajole God. God is the one who even makes poison gas work. And that's what drives people crazy. But that's the aspect of Asiya, of God. God who is the creator. There's another level. That's the I-thou relationship. That's the place where the heart seeks God, where we think of God as a parent, a loving parent, where we think of God as a friend. And we used to use these words, Avinu, Malkeinu, and so on, Baruch Atah. When I say Atah, I'm speaking to that aspect of God, which is the divine of Yetzirah, of the world, of affect and emotions. And that God needs our prayer. As Professor Heschel would say, God in search of man. God needs us. God is lonely. God wants us that we should grow in consciousness greater and greater, so he should have someone with whom to talk in the world, as it were. And that is the Shomea Tefillah, the one who hears our prayer. I'll get back to that. Then there's another aspect of God, like how God is understood by philosophers, the omni, oh, vast God, and so on and so forth. But I don't even exist in that God. Can you imagine when you think of galactic time, how slow it moves? It takes the sun 360 million years to go once around the galaxy. Can you imagine what kind of a timeline that is? On our level of time, this has no meaning. But if anybody thinks of God less than that, he has a very small God. So you need to have a very strong and open and vast understanding of divine infinity and all these things. But that's the God in the world of Berea. Now, then there's God in the deepest place of my subjectivity. That's who I am. I am God. I'm not the big God. I'm a hologram, a snippet of God. But when the teaching goes that a soul is a chelek elokam imal mamish, is a part of the living God, that's what we are talking about.
I'm going to stop that just for a second. I understand that as that we are all chips off the old block.
That you really get to the word echad, and you don't think there's anything else but that oneness. And you are now, as it were, dipped in that divine oneness. And then at the Amida, you get to that too, that divine oneness. Can you imagine what it would be like if a person really at the moment of his death could tune into the divine oneness and dissolve in that like a drop in the ocean, which the Zohar calls lishtava, begufa de malka, to be absorbed in the body, the very body of the king. So these are the aspects of God. So where do we go with davening? What is davenology? Davenology is the work of Jewish renewal in relation to the spiritual technology that we have. So davenology says that when you begin the morning blessings, you just don't sit, you move. Zokev kefufim, pokeach even, matir asurim. You say all these blessings and you bring it into your body. You say the blessing, Asher Yatzar, you have created me with hollows and ducts. Rabbi Shalom, if the ones that need to be open would clog and the ones that need to be closed would seep, I couldn't exist for a moment. Oh God, the breath that you give me, it is pure. Do you see how we have to get, this is davenology of the body. And there's the davenology of the heart, which begins with appreciation. Oh, what a beautiful world you created. I give you thanks, my God. Mizmor letodah. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If I think of what does God need from us, just the same way as when we do something right, we get endorphins from our body. What are the endorphins for God? Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. That's what you give back to God. If you have such a relationship with God of appreciation, then it's not so far-fetched to say that when you drive in the car, you have a conversation as if he's sitting in the passenger seat. She is sitting in the mother of us. Mama God, the one who is the source of Torat Imecha, the Torah that is a mother-like Torah. And then there's the Musar Avicha, the father-like Torah. And you talk to God, your friend, Ne'eman, the most trustworthy friend. And you begin to say, you don't have to do special things. You want to say, well, what a nice morning it is. That's good. Oi, how much traffic there is, Rabbi Shalom. You know, when you have, go with me, be with me, Rabbi Shalom. Another way of saying it, V'shavti b'Beit Hashem kol yemei chayai. All the time, I'm home with God. I'm not far away. B'Beit Hashem, I'm always B'Beit Hashem. So, you and I are talking together, I through the machine, and you will be watching this through the projector. And you know what? How do I know there's quality control? Because God is listening. God is here with me and with you at this point. Tune into that and you will have a different understanding of how we have to go and meditate. Because, you know, the word meditate people used to think that meditate all comes from the Far East, from Buddhism, from Hinduism. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart. What's meditations? Psalm 19 in the Tehillim, way back. Meditation doesn't come from there alone. Meditation is everywhere there's human consciousness. People meditate. The thing is that we would like God to join us in our meditation, that the divine awareness is in our meditation. Even if you do Vipassana and Eastern meditation, and you watch what arises in your mind, instead of closing yourself in a bubble and getting really tight, open yourself to God. Galui v'yadua, please look in there with me. Now arises again lust. Look at it. Rabbi Shalom with me. And it shrinks away. Now there is greed. Now there's jealousy. So all these things that are arising, I'm not the only one who's aware of that. I want God to be aware of it with me at this point. Then meditation moves so quickly into davening and davening into meditation. When you say some of the words like on Shabbos morning, Nishmat Kol Chai, Tevarich et Shimcha Ya Eloheinu, everything that breathes praises your name, Yah, our God. And then you stop for a while. That's so important not to rush on, to stop.
There's a lot there. But at the same time, it feels so very, very simple to take on one aspect of this and to play with it and see what sticks for you. And then we take on a little bit more and a little bit more, and we go deeper and deeper. And we rejoice in being part of this amazing journey and adventure that Reb Zalman kind of like started a fire to in a modern way. So thank you all so much. Like I said, next week, and I think how I'll start is with this talking about meditation that he just did, and that'll lead us into further investigation of all the different ways that we can be in relationship with divinity. And the God that's not a noun, but when we talk about the G word, of our experiences and how we are really affected deeply by our relationship with each other, with ourselves, and with the all, with the one. The thing I want to leave you with this evening, I think, is when Zalman talks about Echad, right? When you get to Echad, of course, he's talking about at the end of Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Talking about, just imagine if for a moment you really can experience ourselves as a drop in the bucket, a drop in the ocean. Egoless, ani lo yadati, my ego did not know. And just to be there and to for a moment is a blessing. I kind of call it the spiritual lost and found. By losing ourselves, we find ourselves. And so with that, let's end with Reb Zalman singing V'tahir Libeinu again. And tell your friends. Boy, I wish that that more of our Boshniks would have come this evening, because I think this is kind of like a primer in a way to all things Jewish Renewal. I could have done many different things, but this is what emerged, and I really thank you for going on this ride with me. So God bless you all. Never too early to say Shabbat Shalom. Prayerful gathering tomorrow at 6 o'clock, and then Shabbos, yay! A week from now, part 2 of this wonderful journey. Okie dokie. Reb Zalman, please, it's all yours.
V'tahir libeinu, v'tahir libeinu, v'tahir libeinu, liyavdecha beyemer, v'tahir libeinu, v'tahir libeinu, v'tahir libeinu.
Oh. My apologies. All right, with that, that was our Zalman interrupt us. Forgive me. That's a good note too.